few minutes from our lost border, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So, this book is divided into it's an international anthology between Mexican writers who write in Spanish and English. Originally they're written in Spanish and then we translated them to English. And American writers like myself who are writing in English. So it's both in Spanish and English. And I'm reading from my essay called A World Between Two Worlds, and tell you a little bit about Juarez and El Paso. And I'm writing about my cousins and what happened to them. So this is about one of my cousins. Just like his mother, my cousin Chavita, the young entrepreneur, was making it happen. He was living in between two worlds, two cultures. He arrived at his job as an architect in El Paso at 6:30 a.m., worked until 4 p.m., then drove across an international bridge to Juarez to manage Café Miro with his wife until 10 p.m. One of the things that you may not know is that Juarez and El Paso are really one city divided by the Rio Grande, which is not bigger than a canal. It probably takes longer to walk from here to where we were in the cafeteria than to go across the border. It's that close. Then he would do it again the next day. Chavita said, the lines at the bridges started getting longer after 9/11, so I had to purchase 2 trucks. I drive to a parking lot near the Juarez side of the bridge, park my truck, and hop on my bike. I bike across the bridge, flash my passport, and bike into El Paso to another parking lot on the American side. Throw my bike into the back of that truck and drive to work. My life was divided in two between El Paso and Juarez. So many people were doing exactly the same thing, day in and day out. You got to know them. I also knew most of the federal guys at the bridge by first name. And they knew me too. It was crazy, but it worked. Chavita imagined bigger and better things, and he had a knack with people and for convincing them to support his dreams. He had gained experience organizing events at his first bar. Café Miro was an even bigger success, although he was overworked and literally on the move all the time. He remembered the Guadalajara mega events that had originally prompted him to organize his first dance party years ago, and he expanded again. First at Carta Blanca Park, and then at the Hipodromo Park in Juarez. He and a partner organized a music festival that attracted dozens of bands. The first year, 2,500 people attended their arts festival. Chavita and his partner published a music magazine and a website to promote their festival, to feature their bands and to allow fans to submit favorite photos and clips. Chavita was an avid user of Facebook and understood the power of social media. The second year, 4,500 young people showed up, and not only were their festivals filled with great live music, but also art exhibits, high-end coffee, and great beer. Chavita. You wouldn't imagine how much time we spent selecting the right coffee. We wanted things to be high class, high end. Everything had to be just right. We wanted young people to have fun, to come together for music, for dancing, for the arts. People began waiting for a festival to happen. The third year, 7,500 people danced the night away at another of Chavita's events. No obstacle was too big to stop him for too long. Bad luck would not get in his way. One day he jumped in his Ford Explorer to buy medicines at a pharmacy. Suddenly a car with tinted windows blocked his way at an intersection, and several men in masks jumped out and pointed 9mm guns at his head. One simply said, "Nomás dame la llave y vete." That is, just give me the key and go now. Chavita walked away from his truck and survived. He loved Juarez. Although the incident spooked him, he never thought of leaving the city. In 2009, the 4th anniversary of their festival, the drug war violence broadened and deepened, but still 5,000 people demanded rock music for a few nights in Juarez. A few phone calls portended the beginning of the end. Strangers asked to talk to the owners of the music festival. And when they got Chavita on the phone, they demanded a percentage of the profits for security services. These strangers were clueless as to how much money the festival made each year. They did not know or care who Chavita was, and they laughed when he protested about his years of work and sacrifice to get to this point. For a few days, Chavita ignored these calls. One day, as he sat drinking coffee at Café Miro, an older man wearing a cheap dark suit approached the manager, talked to him in low and insistent growls, and brazenly began to inspect the place. Chavita had never seen this man in his life. The older man handed the manager a letter and told him to deliver it to the owner. To his great credit, the manager did not point to Chavita and say, "He's right there, the guy with the laptop." The letter went into details about the offer of security services and what would happen to the owners if they did not comply. It was nasty stuff. Chavita called the number in the phone number in the letter, and this was more or less what it said. "We know where you live. We know where you bank. We know what cars you drive. We know about the bar, and we know about the festivals. This is what your payment will be every week. If you don't have a liquor license, or if you need a permit for anything, or if you have problems with inspectors, we'll get you the licenses and the permits. We'll solve the problems with inspectors. We are the government now. We'll provide you with drugs to sell at your events. This is how much you will sell." As Chavita said, it was very businesslike in a certain way, and in another way it was very graphic about what would happen to him and his family and his partner and his partner's family if they did not comply. 2 days after that call, Chavita closed down Café Miro, dismissed all his employees, and ripped the place apart for anything valuable he could take with him or store in a warehouse. In those same 2 days, he packed everything he could from his home and abandoned Juarez for El Paso. Chavita: "It's not about you anymore. It's about your family. I have 2 kids, 4 and 8 years old. I had to leave. In a way, I walked away just in time before anything horrible happened to me. I don't hate Juarez. On the contrary. But if anything had happened to me, if anything had happened to my family, I would probably think differently. I just believe Juarez has so much potential and I would like to go back." So then this last part I'm going to read, I'm discussing these issues with a writer friend of mine. And I'm talking about my grandfather. My grandfather, his name was Sergio Troncoso, and he had the big avenue named after him in Juarez. He was editor and publisher of El Día, one of the first daily newspapers in Juarez in the 1920s. And there's this statue called El Papelero, the paperboy, the bronze paperboy throwing a newspaper. And it's a freedom of the press statue in Juarez. And there are 3 names on that statue, and my grandfather is one of them. And by the way, he told me when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. My grandfather said, "Don't become a journalist or a writer, because if you tell the truth, they will hate you forever." That was his advice. So I'm telling my friend about El Papelero, and this is what he tells me. This is the last part I'm going to read. After I told him the story about my grandfather, my writer friend stared at me solemnly and said, "You know what they did to that statue not long ago?" In hushed tones, he described the scene, but left many details out, which unnerved me. I swallowed hard as his few words permeated my mind, and I imagined the images my friend had left unsaid to me. A hazy morning, the light revealing something next to or draped over El Papelero. Only up close would the images become clear. A human being had been disemboweled, beheaded. A horrifying mix of meat and metal. A warning to all the journalists, don't fuck with the narcos. To hell with the freedom of expression. What power does an inert statue have against such brutality? What power do reminiscences of what Juarez used to be have against submachine guns? What power resides in the small ambitions for a better life of someone like Pepe, or in the dreams of a city with music and arts of Chavita? How can even these words counteract decapitations, dismemberments, and the dollars, billions and billions of dollars, which reward the most brutals for servicing the United States and its drug habits? If you pitted an individual with great ideas against another one with a machete, a cage match featuring a philosopher against a foot soldier, so to speak, I would think that the latter would always have the upper hand. Yet it must be possible to overcome this brutality when we face it in our communities. Otherwise, killers without a conscience would always win. And every city, not only in Mexico, but also across the globe, would become another Juarez. I think the answer is that people don't want to live in a society where violence is normal. People cannot achieve what they want. They cannot strive for what most fulfills them in the kind of city Juarez has become. They cannot raise their children as they want, and they cannot dream of crossing to the other side for a better life, and they cannot live in peace even if they are poor. On this side, we cannot anymore imagine Juarez as an adventure or a possibility, as a place to shop for groceries, or as a destination where children could open their minds to discover another way of life and culture. The Juarez El Paso metropolis, before the drug violence erupted on Avenida Santiago Troncoso, and all the other streets and byways on the other side, was anything but ideal. Too often the citizens of each city used each other. El Paso, richer than its twin to the south, took advantage of the cheap labor. On the other side, what once were cheap groceries, gas, and medicines. So the Juarez El Paso area before the recent drug violence was not a bilingual, binational, bicultural Zion, but it was one world, one entity, one place, one city where you could live in between worlds, had the hope of creating something new, a third way to be, not along the border, but on the border. This is what the violence has destroyed, that unity, however tenuous it ever was. It has destroyed the idea of that unity and the reality of living so uniquely astride an international border. This real idea was always a work in progress, and for the moment, it is lost. Yet that real idea of unity had great value. It had great value to those like Pepe and Chavita, who literally lived in between El Paso and Juarez, making the most of their abilities and creativity. They learned to jump from one language to another, from one side of the international bridge to the other, from one set of rules and conventions to another. Their ways of doing border business fostered adaptable, innovative individuals. The border opened up who they could be, and they were flourishing. In this manner, I identify the most with my cousins Chavita and Pepe, because this border mentality became ingrained in the deepest part of myself. That is, not to believe in the national myths or blustery pronouncements, but to judge the person in front of you. That is, not to rely on stereotypes or seldom spoken prohibitions, but to test the waters with engagement and to find out for yourself what would work and what would not. Living on the border, the in-between two worlds, I believe, made me somewhat of a skeptic of both sides, but also made me find my own way through practice. That way of thinking and questioning frightens ideologues, nationalists, and anyone who prefers to follow orders and duties. The power of returning to that work in progress that was one city between two nations will be one day what will stop that machete from its bloody work. Enough people on both sides of the border will tire of living in violence, which is just another form of authoritarianism, and will organize themselves to defeat the brutal who now have the upper hand. Perhaps the killers will kill so much that what will be left of Ciudad Juarez will not be much of a city at all, and so they will finish destroying the prize for which they've so readily slaughtered thousands. In any case, it will be the power of returning to that unique border life and whatever messy possibilities it harbored that will stop the violence. It was a better life than what we have today, and we understand that fact, mostly in retrospect, as we often do, when we lose what we value before we had a chance to appreciate what it meant. Thank you.